Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendolife here, and today we're going to be looking at the very finest 26 Game Boy games ever released. Why 26? Because. Few rules to put forward to make the video a little bit more interesting. Number one, only one game per series. You can't have just like Invader Bob 1 and Invader Bob 2, because also, we're only going to be looking at original Game Boy games. We are not going to be looking at any of this bumpy nonsense, this color rubbish here, because we've got a video idea for them as well. Can you guess what it is? As usual, the first 21 are going to be in no particular order, so don't think there is some kind of hidden order. They are just, they were just written down in the order that we thought of them, alright? It's fine. It's fine. But then the last 5 are going to be a top 5. It's like a video within a video. You're getting your money's worth. You see, we're always thinking about you. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. Do you ever think anyone bought this game expecting it to be like Super Mario Land 2? Oh, what a surprise that must have been. A pleasant one, or at least I bloody hope so, because Wario Land is so different to traditional Mario games that honestly, it could be considered entirely unrelated to the mainline Mario series. Being the earliest entry, this one is a little bit raw compared to the later games, but it's still a cracking good game, and if you haven't played it, then I seriously implore that you do. Alright, Kirby can't copy enemy abilities in this one, but like Wario Land, it was the first, so shush. It's not an especially tough game until you discover the secret hard mode, but it is a ruddy, enjoyable one. Probably it's less forgiving than Star Allies, and its length isn't anything to call your mother about, but it's a perfect little portable romp. And look at that face, how can you say no to that face? Oh, Donkey Kong, let me count the ways in which I love you. All 3 Donkey Kong Country games were ported in the Land form to the Game Boy, and whilst none of them are as visually stunning as the SNES games, they play just marvelously. There's also some new, or arguably just different content in here, so don't think you've played them if you haven't played them, because you won't have played them. The second one's the best, and I won't hear any arguments otherwise, even if the third one was higher rated. As the name suggests, this is the second Castlevania game to come to the Game Boy, and thankfully it has absolutely nothing to do with Simon's Quest. Belmont's Revenge trimmed a lot of the fat of the first Game Boy outing, and enhanced the whole thing to be a little bit better suited to the portable 8-bit beast. It stands up surprisingly well, and if you somehow missed out on this, it could definitely be worth your while. Don't let the name fool you, this is basically Chucky Egg, but on the Game Boy. Or at least that's what my colleague wrote in the notes. It's basically a classic arcade-style collectathon platformer, which at first glance could have absolutely nothing to do with the film. It's possible that, like many licensed games back in the day, that the Bill and Ted branding was essentially slapped on at the last minute, and even though it bears the LJN logo, it's still a bloody good game. Balloon Fight on the NES was the passion project of the woefully missed Satoru Iwata, and Balloon Kid is pegged as its sequel. Although it's not entirely clear how much involvement Iwata had in this follow-up, it managed to get the balloon fight mechanics and gameplay down absolutely superbly. Fly around, collect balloons, it's not a complex game, but it's utterly adorable and wonderfully replayable. The game shares the same name as the arcade original, but that's about it. Well, except for the first 4 levels that are carbon copies of those from the cabinet. After those, though, you're plunged into what you'd now call a Mario vs. Donkey Kong game. The whole thing is an utter joy from start to finish. Mario's got new moves, new enemies to combat, and an old flame to rescue. Miss this one and regret it. On the face of it, Mania doesn't really sound like a top game for the Game Boy, but oh lordy, you'd be wrong to think that. It's actually a first-party Nintendo property headed up by Miyamoto itself, and it shows. Every level is a bite-sized chunk of puzzling goodness, slathered in Nintendo charm and sprinkled with a killer soundtrack. Think of it like an endless series of dungeon rooms from The Legend of Zelda, but with less direct combat and more lateral thinking. Also, it has battery saving, which for a game like this is absolutely crucial and not exactly the norm back in the day, so top marks. Not entirely unlike Mega Man, Kid Dracula tasks you with platforming and shooting foes left, right, and, unlike Mega Man, up as well. It's one of the most visually striking Game Boy games, using big sprites to show plenty of detail, but without hampering the gameplay at all. Stick in a great soundtrack and some genuinely impressive cutscenes given the limited hardware, and you're on to a serious winner. In case you didn't know, platformers were kind of a thing in the 90s. A bit. Realistically, you couldn't move for mascot platformers, and even more prevalent were licensed platformers like this. Thankfully, not all of them were complete rubbish, and the combination of great graphics, genuinely original and innovative gameplay, and the charm of Tiny Toons makes this one of the best platformers on the system. Think Contra can't run on something as puny as the Game Boy? Think again, sucker! Operation C, or Probotector as we know it for some mad reason, is a wildly accurate Contra game squeezed onto the Game Boy with almost nothing sacrificed beyond resolution and color, as you'd expect. You might struggle to keep up with everything that's happening on such a small screen, but if you're dedicated enough, you can have the full Contra experience on something with less computing power than your average modern-day calculator. Just like Operation C, this is a full-fat Gradius game expertly squozen onto a tiny handheld. It really is bloody phenomenal what they were able to do back in the day. The graphics are brilliant not only for their variety and detail, but also that there's no uncertainty as to where you're allowed to fly and where you can't. And also, come on, it's Gradius. Do you really need me to say any more than that? It's Gradius on the Game Boy. It's Gradius on the Game Boy. What did the Game Boy do to deserve so many genuinely excellent licensed games? What happened? DuckTales is yet another example of a tailor-made port for the Game Boy, shining brighter than it arguably deserves. Everything you'd expect to want is here, and more in droves. And whilst it may not be the most accessible game despite its cutie aesthetic, if you've played a DuckTales game before, you shouldn't overlook this one just because it's in black and white. Some say the second one is better, but those people probably don't even know who Bimmy is. I really feel like I'm just repeating myself here, but this is yet another incredible port for the Game Boy. It may seem primitive compared to the 3 brawlers that come out a year these days, but for the time this really was just amazing. If you're willing to give the throwback simplicity a fair shot, then you shan't be disappointed. Alright, I'll be honest, I wasn't going to include this on the list, but my colleagues absolutely insisted. That's all due to one factor I hadn't ever had the luxury of experiencing: 4-player link-up. On the surface, it's a fairly straightforward racing game, but like so many other races out there, it only really shines when you rope 3 friends into the mix. The ordinary immediately becomes extraordinary, and at the time you couldn't do anything better on a long train or bus journey. It's R-Type. It's exactly R-Type. All these people these days saying certain games outright won't run on the Switch. Look at this! Excellent port after excellent port after excellent port. If they can get this many great games running on the Game Boy, they can get great games running on the Switch. They can just do it. If the Game Boy got any more love than this, it may have to file a restraining order. Oh yeah, if it wasn't obvious, the game's great. Think you've played all the classic Mega Mans just because you own all the NES games? Haha! Think again, you dangerously confident sausage. Mega Man 5 on the Game Boy is only identical in name to its NES counterpart. Other games on the platform recycled old bosses, but not this one. Also, you know that arm cannon Mega Man is so famous for? Well, now it takes on an even more literal meaning, firing his hand from his arm as he charges it up. It's pretty cool. If you've not played it, it's basically a new Mega Man game to you. Sort it out. One of the weirder and more obscure Batman games, this gem personally passed me by. It may not be especially true to the source material, given that Batman himself mainly totes a handgun and kills without mercy, but it's definitely one of the most enjoyable Batman side-scrollers that I've ever played. Pretend you're actually playing as RoboCop and you've struck platforming gold, my friend. Despite technically being a Ghosts and Goblins game, Gargoyle's quest is much more like the adventure of Link than anything else. Wander the world top-down in a top-down perspective, and enter many side-scrolling battles just like in Zelda 2. It's always interesting to play from the villain's point of view, and this is no exception to that rule. Yep, it's Picross. If you don't know what that is, it's what you're looking at right now. Mario's Picross isn't necessarily anything more than a superb Picross game with a Mario theme, but the charm and whimsy of Mario is what makes it special. That's all there really is to say about this. Despite its notoriety, Battletoads is an incredibly fun and challenging game, and the Game Boy version lives up to that in spades. It's also not the same game as the NES and SNES games of legend, rather it's an entirely new and less frustrating experience from start to finish. If only for the fact that the speeder section doesn't exist. Well, it sort of does, but it's actually feasible to beat this one if you can imagine such a thing. Oh, well, those are the first 21 out of the way, but what about this top 5 that we've been bleating on about since the very start of the video and haven't mentioned since? Here they are. Before you say anything, this isn't breaking a rule. Super Mario Land 3 is a Wario game, so we can have both. My mum said we could. Super Mario Land 1 got a lot of things right, but it still somewhat missed the mark. Super Mario Land 2 took a different approach and played off the strengths of the Game Boy's portable nature. It's also not a facsimile of any other Mario game, it's almost painfully unique instead. The bosses, the world, there's no Mario game quite like it. It's bursting with imagination and easily stands out as the best platformer this system has to offer. This game rocked the world, but you don't need me to tell you that. Tetris is one of those games that essentially requires no instruction. After just a few minutes, you'll know exactly what's what and what you're expected to do. I can't do it justice in this tiny segment here, so if you want to learn more about how Tetris came to be, I highly recommend you check out the video by gaming historian all about it. There's a card up there. Watch it, or there's also a link in the description. Needless to say, this is a game that hasn't nor will ever age. We've finally had a remake, so I suppose I can stop badgering Reggie about it. Metroid 2 is one of those odd games that divides fans like no other. People like me love it to pieces, but some people think its slower pace and oversized sprites make it less enjoyable than the other games in the series. True, it may not be as refined as Super Metroid, but from the NES original, this was a massive step forward to what we know as Metroid today. Even if you've played Samus Returns, I implore you to give this one a go. If not for me, then for the baby Metroid. I fought for this to be number one, I really did. But between you and me, my colleagues aren't 90s kids. They don't remember. Pokémon, Pokémon, Pokémon. One of the biggest franchises in gaming today, and it all started here. At least in the West. A sprawling adventure with a staggering amount of variety and originality. Today, a buggy and beloved callback. It hasn't aged perfectly when compared to modern entries in the series, but this is a game that defined a generation. Pun intended. If you can put up with the inability to run and some massive imbalances, you can still play this very happily today. Only bad thing is, B-Drill should have been stronger. You know I'm right. How the hell do you make a sequel to a SNES game for the Game Boy and fix a lot of the issues it had? Holy great googly Jesus, Nintendo managed it with this one. A Link to the Past may have had more content than Link's Awakening, but all the nonsense like having to work through an entire dungeon just to have another pop at the boss has been entirely sorted out. In my eyes, this game is just as good as A Link to the Past, and in my nostalgia-blinded opinion, I'd say it's even better. To this day, it sits up there with Majora's Mask as one of the weird Zelda games, doing some really funky stuff like bringing in chain chomps and a giant leviathan that hatches from an egg, but it all absolutely works. You can't find a better adventure on the Game Boy. It just can't be done. And there you have it. What do you think of this list? Do you think that it is the best thing you have ever seen, or do you think it's a load of old rubbish? And no, there is nothing in between. Let us know and tell us what you'd have put in the list in the comments down below. Because algorithms. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you send me a green pixelated version of that subscribe button, and be sure to check out nintendolife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye bye.